Yo guys, what's goody? Welcome back to the channel. This time it's going to be a discussion on the most common Inazuma 11 tropes spanning the entire franchise that we're likely to see in the new Victory Road game. So for those who aren't aware as to what a trope is, according to Google, it's a significant or recurring theme. Now I do want to preface this by explaining that some of these ideas were original thoughts from a friend of mine called the Game King from an Inazuma 11 Discord group. He was partially the inspiration for this video, and we did brainstorm a lot of the characters that are going to fit into these tropes that we're going to discuss. So for the most part, I've grouped together similar tropes in kind of groups of three. The first of which is protagonists, antagonists, and a hidden final boss. So let me explain. Throughout the entire core story of most of the games and anime, there's always obviously the clear-cut protagonists, an initial antagonist that we're used to or presented quite early on in the story, and then often what we find is that there is a hidden boss after we've dealt with that antagonist that is the true end goal. Now let's start with the protagonist. So the examples of these are obviously Endo, Tenma, and Asto. And they normally have quite an infectious personality. That's quite a common trait across the three of them. They're rather upbeat and football mad. Now this is a direct contrast with Unmei, who does appear to be quite meek and possibly insufferable to begin with. Now when it comes to antagonists, they often follow a very similar framework of being a character that we're introduced to initially quite early on in the story, and we think that they will be one of the final adversaries that we have to deal with, and then often midway through the story and such, they often end up joining our team and making way for proper final adversary. Examples of these would be Jude, Tsurugi, and Haizaki, and obviously the Victory Road example would be Endo Haru. Now originally I thought that the kind of personality Endo Haru would have in this game would be cocky, but while I was brainstorming with Game King, he came up with a perfect point highlighting the fact that Endo Haru is the son of Endo Mamoru. He's likely to be significantly skilled and very talented. He is referred to as the monster of football, and the chances are he's going to have a personality rather nonchalant. He's going to be bored of everyone. He's probably going to be looking for someone to push, to reach their potential so that he can actually have someone on the same level as him to compete with. The drive to improve and push yourself is something that's very intrinsic to Endo Mamoru and the Endo line really. So that is something that we can kind of expect to see from Endo Haru. Now to round off this trope, I want to talk about the hidden final boss. I think that this is actually pretty self-explanatory, and anyone who's used to the Inazuma 11 series does understand what I'm talking about. So often in the games, who were originally shown is not actually the final chapter 10, boss that we play against. So for example, in the original series, we had Royal Academy seemed to be the final boss we'd have to deal with in the game. And then obviously Zeus actually came in. And in Go, we had Dragon Link halfway through what we thought was the final match. Then a new team comes in, and that was also the same thing that happened in Orion with Shadow of Orion. So obviously this is a very common trope, and I would expect the same thing to happen with the new Gen Ryman team, which currently is positioned to be the final boss of the game, but I think it's very realistic to expect another team to show up that we may in fact have to join up with some members of the Ryman team in conjunction with the Nagumahara players in order to beat. So for the next batch of tropes, we have Playmakers, Prodigies hampered by injury, and wasted potential. So the example of Playmakers we've seen throughout the series so far would be Jude, Shindo, and Zine. Now, I don't think we've really seen a true Playmaker that fits the standard Inazuma 11 mold in Victory Road just yet. Now, Yagyu could fit this role, but that remains to be seen. Now, I had a theory, basically, where I don't think that we're going to see a Playmaker in the Nagumahara team at all. Not until very close to the end of the game. And I think this is because Akihiro Hino is setting up that Playmaker to be Unmei. Now, I say this because Unmei is the manager, and he has, this view of the entire match and everything that's going on, and I think that's going to play into his skill and his talent. Now, if any of you have ever watched Kuroko no Basuke, there's a player on there with an ability called Emperor's Eye. This allows him to basically envision everything that's going on around him on his field of play, and thus it allows him to know what's going to happen and how best to react and such. And I think that's what we're going to get from Unmei. Obviously, when we're playing the game, we even view it from a bird's eye view, and I think that's going to kind of be Unmei's special talent, but that remains to be seen. Now, when it comes to Prodigies hampered by injury, I don't really think much needs to be said here. We have Eric, Amamiya Tayo, Nasaka, and obviously the example of the player hampered by some form of injury in Victory Road is clearly Unmei, and we know that he's going to have to work through his trauma, probably some way through managing the team in order to actually be able to play football once again. He needs to be able to get past that mental barrier, kind of similar to Chigiri from Blue Lock. Now, when it comes to characters with wasted potential in the series, Maxime from Orion, Cadence Soundtown, and Kaiser come to mind. They just appear to be players that either from the role or the appearance of the character, you expected more from them, but what actually played out in the story was quite underwhelming. And what I'm hoping is that Shinohara Reika, the female fire type forward from Nagumahara, won't be overshadowed by Sakurazaki, but once again, that remains to be seen. Now, this next batch of tropes is one that I think a lot of people will know and understand. So first you have your ace strikers, then your super sub or players who join the team halfway through the story, and finally your kind of ice and fire duo. So with regards to ace strikers, obviously Gwenji, Hakuryu, and Kozumaru come to mind, and from the Nagumahara team, I think it's pretty evident that Sakurazaki is going to fit this ace striker role. He has that fierce look about him, and part of the storyline certainly seems to indicate that there'll be some friction between him and Unmei, which is pretty commonplace for the ace strikers and the protagonist within the series. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a similar backstory to Tobitaka. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a gang member and Unmei really has to pester him in order for him to join the Nagumahara football team. And then when we're talking about a super sub or players who join halfway through the story, I'm thinking about players like Gojin, Nishiki, and Hyde Nakata, which are, either players that didn't really have too much of a role, but then when it comes to their time to shine, they really, step up, or players that we kind of hear about partway, through the story, and then at a certain point they join and they make a massive impact to the team and the team dynamic. And so I'm expecting that what's going to happen with the Nagumahara team is there will be a player who maybe was, playing overseas and decides to return back to Japan and joins the Nagumahara team. Last but certainly not least, there's always an ice and fire type duo in basically every single one of the games, whether this is Axel and Sean from the first game, or Torch and Gazelle, or Sneo and Amamiya Tayo. These tropes always come up in basically every single game, and in this one I'm obviously just expecting this to be the children of Axel and Sean that show up in the new gen Ryman team. Right, and the final trope group that I want to talk about are split personalities, the bad boy / girl, or characters that are quite chatty and annoying. Now, first of all, there's only ever really been two characters with split personality storylines, them being Fubuki and Hikaru. Now, I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever watched Phineas and Ferb, but there's a character on there called Dr. Doofenshmirtz, and he has like this classic meme template line, and basically if I adapt it for this, it's if I had a nickel for every time there was an Inazuma 11 character with dissociative identity disorder, I would have two, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? So it's just one of those things where I really feel like it's a coin flip. We're either going to get a character with this, or it's not going to happen. Okay, when it comes to bad boy / girls, I'm thinking of characters such as Karia, Tobitaka, Fudo, and, I think that there's something about Kudakai Kameo. His character design just gives me this feeling of, obviously he's portrayed as quite meek and innocent and shy, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's also a slight little rotten side and aspect to him. So that'll be interesting to see whether that is a storyline that kind of develops in Victory Road. And finally, we're talking about chatty and annoying characters. These are pretty obvious. Sue Hartland was a very frustrating character. For me, Shinsuke was super annoying, and I know that Game King reminded me of Satan Gal from the Orion series, who was an extremely enervating character. And Yagyu seems to have quite a friendly personality, so that could be the case. But Game King once again mentioned Endo Haru. He's the son of Endo Mamoru, so he's going to be football mad, isn't he? So that's probably going to be a big aspect of his character, is just talking and talking and talking. So I'm kind of looking forward to that, to be honest. And then last but not least, just one more trope, which is player clones. Now, throughout the series, we've seen players such as Luz Kasim, who was clearly a fake Asto. We've seen Demonio Strada, who was a fake Jude. The entire Little Gigant team was just a clone of Season 1 and Season 2 Raimon. And so obviously there are going to be scout characters that we now know won't make it into the games, based off some of Hakahiro Hino's dev notes. So what I'm expecting is that some of the new scout characters are going to be player clones of old ones that can't make it into the game. So for example, Hyde Nakata is unlikely to be in this new game, and so I would expect a clone of him. And then also Endo Haru is a big protagonist within the series, so kind of similar to Mecha Endo, I would also expect a Endo Haru clone, and that could obviously be pretty cool. But yeah, those are all the tropes that I've kind of come up with for now that I think are very commonplace within the Inazuma 11 series. And I would expect those to make a return in the Victory Road games. Feel free to drop some comments if there are any other tropes that you think are likely to return. I appreciate the new influx of subscribers, and I'm going to continue to try and make good content. So if you guys did enjoy, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and until the next time, guys, peace.